Reasoned reality is built on one conviction. When people are given evidence, clarity, and the freedom to think for themselves, they choose a better future. In a culture shaped by outrage, conspiracy, and rigid belief systems, this is a space for honest conversation where reason matters and facts still count. We talk with biblical scholars, historians, activists, artists, and everyday people navigating faith, politics, and culture with honesty and courage. Nothing is off the table. If you're tired of easy answers and ready for conversations that actually go somewhere, you're in the right place. This is Reasoned Reality. Hey friends, welcome back to Reasoned Reality. My name is Joe Smith. I am your host. I have been looking forward to this conversation for some time. My guest today is Ross Murray. Ross is the Vice President of Education and Training at the GLAAD Media Institute, where he helps train advocates and organizations and media professionals and community leaders and on and on and on around LGBTQ plus issues and storytelling and public engagement. But that is only just a little bit of the story for Ross, because Ross is also an ordained deacon in the Lutheran Church, founder of the Naming Project, which is a faith-based ministry and camp for LGBTQ youth. Ross is an author, a speaker, and you have spent years working to bridge spaces that many people just kind of assume can't be bridged, which is why I think this feels so incredibly relevant right now. So Ross, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us.
Thank you. It is really good to be here talking with you.
Yeah. I enjoyed our conversation. For those I have nobody knows, but we had an initial Zoom call or a Google Meet or something a week or 2 weeks ago now. I don't even remember. Just kind of getting to know each other a little bit.
Time has no meaning. It happened. That's what we know.
Man, that is true words, right? But ever since then, I've really been looking forward to this and diving into your story and what you do at GLAAD and how important the work is. And so, so let's jump into it. You grew up in a small Minnesota town, right? Deeply
Yes.
church-shaped world. Would that be?
Well, it's even more accurate to say I grew up 15 miles outside of a tiny northern Minnesota town. So I was like in the woods. This is like the 80s and 90s and whatnot. So like it is it's very church shaped in that very like mainline Protestant kind of way. It's funny. I would talk to my pastor and he's like, well, we are the big church in town, which meant we had 300 members. Right? But we're all, when the town has 800 people, 300 members is the big church in town. And so it's kind of, it was the culture, it was the community. It was the kind of thing where the pastors of a lot of the different churches would do things like be the referees for like junior high basketball games and have a second job as a bus driver for the school. So like the Baptist pastor was also the bus driver. And you kind of like would see people showing up in so many different ways and places. And it kind of was that stereotypical, very white, but also like that Americana kind of look about it too, which was kind of interesting.
Very Norman Rockwell.
Kind of, yeah. It was, conformity is part of it. I just went back to my high school reunion after 30 years. And we were small, so we hold something every 5 years, like the entire school does. And I had not gone back since I graduated to this particular thing. Because I was like, when you're different, when you're gay and you know that you're different than others, and in some ways they kind of know it, but you don't figure out like the language for that, you kind of find ways to get out. And it took me a while. I can speak and do a lot of things, but my goodness, I was terrified to go face my classmates from 30 years ago. And it was fine. It was good. They were lovely. Yeah. We sat in the VFW and drank beer.
That's awesome. Wow. That had to be a little bit healing.
It was good. Yeah. It was fun. Yeah. It was really good. I had one kind of frank conversation with a classmate. It's interesting because I thought of her as like one of the most popular people. She was the homecoming queen from our class. And she said, my senior year was hell. And I was like, why? You had everything going for you. And I felt like I was the one that was totally in the outs. And then she just talked about like weird interpersonal stuff that was happening. Again, small towns, once you're all like embedded with each other, that's what happens. And so like it took the blinders off. I was so busy focused on probably my own struggles and being in the closet and what was going on, like not recognizing what everyone else was going through too. And it takes being in our 40s to realize that we should.
Now, one of the things that I kind of have discovered in interviewing people and sitting down and having conversations like this is that the places that we come from often teach us survival skills, right? What did your hometown teach you? And then on the flip side of that, having left it for so long, talking about just going back, what did you have to unlearn?
Yeah, I think, I mean, one really interesting thing that came from me being in a small town, and I'm curious this is true for other like rural queer people, is the safest place that I felt. One, my family is great. And I've always been really good with them. And the other place was the church. That pastor that I mentioned earlier he was someone that I did come out to in high school, which I did very little of that, and was very good at sort of helping me, one, kind of get over myself and realize a little bit the bigger, wider world out there. He was supportive and also very realistic where he thought the church and the world was at that point. Like he made a prediction like the Lutheran Church, the ELCA that I'm a part of, like isn't going to change its policy, drop its ban on gay clergy. He goes, I've been to conventions. This is what I see happening. I don't think it's going to happen. And then when it did happen, he was there and hugged me and told me he was very happy that he was wrong too. But he was, he was in the ecosystem and also probably trying to shield and protect me from getting hurt and getting harmed. And so, there's very much like looking around to see who's going to be helpful, who's going to be vocal, who's going to be supportive, and trying to make those assumptions. I tell people this is what I think gaydar actually is. It is looking for so many clues about like, are you going to be either like me in some way, or are you going to be an ally to me in some way? And I am looking for those like symbols and clues and things. I sort of carry that and realize like I speak carefully until I can assess where someone is. And I'm not closeted, but I will say getting into a relationship and being married makes it very easy. I can just like reference my husband. It means I never say I'm gay. I just say like my husband. And I'm like, you can all do that work in your head.
Actually, really smart. That's really smart. I'm curious as you talk, you kind of, I don't know, man, correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of seems like you lived inside worlds that I think a lot of people would kind of still frame as incompatible, right? Because you've got this queer identity, you've got this, church background, religious, lay vocation kind of deal. You're in public advocacy. And I'm curious, when did you realize that, and maybe this wasn't an issue for you. So if it wasn't, just let me know. But when did you realize that maybe like that apparent conflict between those worlds wasn't actually inside you as much as it was inside the systems that you were part of?
That's a really good question because I had such a supportive pastor and because I was the best little boy in the world and was very heavily active and involved with my church and sort of like beloved and a staple to the local community, and then kind of a little bit out into the wider, larger church, at least the church, Northeast Minnesota, right? And I went to college. Ultimately went to a private Lutheran college. So like it was still a church college. And I was active both in campus ministry and in the LGBTQ student organization. And I actually had the advisor to the LGBTQ student organization tell me, other students don't know how you can be active in both these things. Like, and he was the one that pointed out the conflict. I was not experiencing it, right? Because I was just living my life. And so one, him naming that for other people, I think was a big deal. The thing that really cemented that was, I was out in college. My coming out of college was instead of telling people directly, I told a couple of gossipy people, and then they just told everyone else for me. And then I didn't have to have
strategic.
Yeah, I didn't have to have endless long conversations. I just sort of like let that get ahead of me. But again, well accepted, loved by my peers, very active, and didn't see that conflict until after college. I joined one of those organizations that like a traveling music ministry team. You live out of a van and you do programs at churches. Yeah. And I had a lot of friends that had been in it, especially the year before. And it said like, this is the kind of thing I want to do, right? Like performing and travel and all that cool stuff. And because I had had such a good experience at my college, I was like, well, my natural charm and charisma is just going to win over them the same way they won over my roommate in college was a like Church of Christ guy too. And I came out to him. We got along very well. We had a really good experience. His church had some struggles with me, but he and I were always great. And so I was like, oh, I can just like win over everybody. And then I got into that program and I was out in my charming self and it did not work. And was with them for about 3-4 months. And early on, someone, I think I know who now, called the organization to sort of out me to the organization, which I kind of had been out already. But that created a thing. I think another of my particular teammates, I suspect that it's because he wanted to get himself out of the program because he was realizing it was a really bad fit for him. But he used me as the reason, like, well, my supporters couldn't like support this. And the organization sort of had this meeting and ultimately they kicked me out and they kept him in. And so I feel like he also kind of got punished for this too, because it was not the outcome he wanted. And now he had to stick with it because he just like ousted the guy who was probably the most excited to be there. And that was the big thing of, and again, my issue was never with God. It was always with people. Like, this was working really well. And then here's where I hit these barriers, right? And from there, I was in the Twin Cities by that point. People with an organization that at the time was called Lutherans Concerned / North America, which is not a great title, but it was what a lot of places used, reached out to me because they heard what happened. I got involved with the organization to try to make more Lutheran churches welcoming and inclusive. And then from there, that's what led into that work to like make the whole evangelical Lutheran church in America that I'm a part of become more welcoming and inclusive through some kind of very specific policy changes. And so like ended up doing more and more with them through leadership and work. And that's kind of what propelled me into this. But it's also where that it was vocation setting that incident. I would not be where I am now if that hadn't happened. And I also don't want that to happen to anyone else either.
Right, right. It's funny that you mentioned that because when I was at a very fundamentalist conservative Bible college and got into some trouble. Not a story I'm going to jump into here, but all I'll say about it is that I'm 49 and I still feel this way. So I feel like it's not something that I was just in the emotion of, but got into some trouble, got kicked out of a group just like that. One of the things that I really struggled with in the years after that, because of some of the things that the Dean of Men said to me, I really internalized a lot of those things. And then for years behaved, lived, made decisions from that place of real hurt, which then created more hurt in my life. And it took a long time for me to untangle all of that stuff and recognize just because this person in authority said this thing about me does not make that thing true. But I lived for a long time like it was. And I'm curious what you had to do, because I'm sure that, hindsight is what it is. And you're obviously incredibly successful and you're making a huge impact, not just locally, but also all over the United States and I guess globally too. But man, that would have just sucked in the moment. I feel were there things that you had to like undo or not listen to so that you didn't internalize those as you move forward?
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing I've learned about myself. And this happened both with that experience, that organization. It happened during the church convention where we did ultimately like change those policies, drop the ban on LGBTQ clergy or clergy and same gender relationships. I can let a lot of big systemic stuff roll off my back. When it is interpersonal and it's someone that I know and have a relationship with, that is what stings more than anything else. And I think, again, this goes back to the, my high school, my high school, my class that I just went to that was 30 people. We all knew each other, right? And and the people that were part of my team in that music ministry organization had a lot of feelings about that. One, I'm fairly close with. It's funny, someone texted me that they were with him and his wife, who's also was part of that organization, and they told him the story of what happened to me. And I said, yeah, we're pretty good friends. I had others that I felt a lot of bitterness and resentment toward. I've gotten messages from some saying that they have, that their hearts and minds have changed in some ways. And I think during some of those like marriage referendums, they voted the way I would have wanted them to. And I still hold a lot of that too. When we were doing the church convention, to change those policies, I heard a lot of, bigoted, homophobic stuff that was being said. The ones that stung the most and they weren't even the worst comments, but they were ones that were coming from people that I knew. And it's a lot harder when it's your personal relationship and the stakes are so much higher. And again, that's wounding and harmful for me. And through kind of a lot of this work that I've been doing through GLAD and through others, like a lot of this is organizing work, it shows how much personal relationships are incredibly important. It is possible that at least a couple of those people that made those comments were not connecting whatever they were saying back to me. And one was just like concern for split of the church in the future, right? Like it wasn't an explicitly homophobic thing, but it was kind of holding up the policy as it was. And in his head, he didn't make that connection. And again, if we'd had a conversation before and I said, this is the way in which this policy is harming me or harming people I know, then he might have made that connection quicker, easier, better. But because that didn't happen for, just circumstances, I think that also is part of that's part of, when people don't know, they speak off of what they have heard, or this goes back to GLAAD, what they hear and see in the media about the community, which might be accurate and in a lot of cases is not. And so I always want to put a real person in front of them with a real relationship, because you can think about how this law or this bill is going to have a direct impact on someone, rather than like it's some community that I don't think I'm connected to whatsoever.
Man, there's a lot you said there. Holy cow. Yeah, there's a lot. One of the things that I always try to do, and I think I may have mentioned this to you earlier before when we were talking, that whenever I hear, like I always feel like moments like this are sacred. And I mean that like whether you're religious or not religious, but I still hold these moments as sacred because somebody is sitting across from me, right, digitally, but sitting
Mhm.
across from me, sharing their story, right, just kind of bearing who they are. And so I always try to put myself in their shoes just to empathize, to kind of connect or whatever. But there's always barriers, right? Because like you said, you don't know what you don't know, right? I'm curious, sitting in this space, listening to you talk, trying to empathize, trying to connect with what you said, telling these stories. And of course, there's always going to be a barrier because we don't know what we don't know. And I have no idea what it's like to grow up gay, right? In the United States, in the Midwest and the Bible Belt. And sitting there listening to you, I can try to imagine how it would feel if
Mhm.
somebody was standing at a podium in a large gathering space debating my place in that thing. And I'm curious, I don't even know if this is an answerable question, Ross, but I mean, what is that like? I mean, that just has to be
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there is plenty of internet chatter from the community. And this is not just gay people. This is so many marginalized groups
right,
realizing
right.
like decisions get made about our lives without us. That phrase, nothing about us without us, we use that a lot too. Is this being informed by the lived experience of the community? And here's the hard part. We are a very big, diverse community. And so like what works well for one part doesn't always work for everybody else. I am a white cisgender gay man who in the LGBTQ community has a lot of privilege and a lot of power. And sometimes I'm the one who's in the room when other people can't get in there. And so how do I use that for myself? But I think, what I wonder is sort of, what is informing what they think? What's informing what they know? Where are they hearing this? I'm aware of how much misinformation and disinformation there is about the community. GLAAD is an expert on how media works and how much it shapes people's thoughts and feelings. And the pulpit is a media platform, as is TikTok and television. And knowing that there's this misinformation out there means, people are only as good as what they see or hear or know. And the best thing to be the anecdote for that is the personal trusted relationships. It is knowing someone and really knowing them in a way to understand how that's going to influence how people think or talk about a rule or a policy or something like that too. Which is why, both for the misinformation is also why we really need allies, non-LGBTQ people who are speaking up and doing that really forcefully and speaking about what their personal stake is. I always say a story like yours, I think, is really powerful because I used to believe this. I used to think this. This is what taught me that. And I had an experience that changed how I thought about things, that changed my perspective. It gives other people who are conflicted or confused, like it calms them. It's okay to be where you are, to be confused or ignorant. I was too. And this is how I got out of that. Here's here's the steps that I took to be in a place of allyship. And I think that ends up being really, really important to note for people too, is they just need some kind of like one affirmation without them feeling shame or guilt, and then like a path forward. And that's one of the things that I feel like I do a lot through GLAAD, through public speaking and the writing and stuff like that too. Like it's okay to not know. The entire story of the naming project of the book, the Made Known Loved, is essentially how we built the naming project. with, we didn't know what we were doing. We were making up as we go, and we tried this. And a few times it did not work and backfired spectacularly. And you can learn from my mistakes and do something better than I did the first time around. Like,
That's awesome. Well,
yeah.
let's jump into that. You bring it up, and I wanted to talk about that. For those that have no clue, you just mentioned the naming project. Tell people what that is.
Yeah, the Naming Project is an LGBTQ youth ministry. Our main program is a summer camp. So, queer church camp for teenagers. If you went to a church camp, especially if you went to a Lutheran Bible camp, it will look a lot like that, because that's what I went to and that's where we worked. And it's the model that we knew. So the schedule, has that pattern of what you'd recognize. The thing that actually just makes it really queer is the community, the people that are there. And they influence the way, they influence how we do the Bible study, the stories that we see, the ways in which they resonate with people. They influence the songs we sing, the hand motions that we have changed to match those songs, the ways that we have found that a lot of church camp music can get a pretty easily queer twist to it, right? And the things that we've done have sort of been built out of that. And it's designed really to be a set apart space. Adolescence is confusing and conflicting, and you're figuring out who you are, who God made you to be. And for me, my church camp experience was formative in helping me to be the person that I am. And I want that experience for others. And also, when you are figuring out who you are, especially if you want to figure out what name you want to be called or what pronouns you want to have used, it's hard to do that with your parents and school and jobs and community that don't catch on that quickly or can't catch on. So sometimes we've had youth come to our camp and tell us, I would like to be called this because I want to see how it feels. And one camper did that, returned a year and said, I know that you knew me as this name. I'm really sorry. I know that's confusing, but would you call me something else? And we said, yeah, we will. And then we did. And then they came back a third year and said, yeah, that name wasn't the right one for me. It wasn't a fit. And so they landed on name that's the one that they use now as a grown-up adult. And, that's kind of why it's the Naming Project. It matches the dozens of biblical stories about people's names getting changed when their destiny is changing too. And for understanding how important and telling having a name that reflects who you are is, even a name that reflects not who you were, but actually who you're becoming. We have great biblical examples of that, which is why I laugh when people fight about name changes. There is a country in the world that if we followed that rule of never believing people's name changes, that we would call Jacob. Remembering that this name changing is actually divine and God sanctioned, in a lot of cases, God initiated, helps to put that perspective about why a young person might say, the thing that you have been calling me for the last 15, 18, whatever years, you thought that was a fit, but now that I know myself better and that you know me better, we're going to find a name that's a better fit for me.
Makes sense. And for those that don't know, he referenced Jacob. There's an origin story in the Old Testament about Jacob wrestling with God. And at the end of that, walking away changed, and God naming Jacob Israel, which means, I think it's the one who struggles or wrestles.
Yeah.
Something.
The one who strives with God. It's got a cool.
Yeah.
And it's a story about wrestling, which is also pretty gay too. Sorry to all the straight wrestler bros. The Lutheran college I went to also had a very strong wrestling program, so I was around a lot of wrestlers. I was not.
That's funny. The Naming Project, it is interesting. Here's one of the questions I wanted to ask you. So there are a lot of listeners that came from the same kind of places that we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
And they have deconstructed and some have reconstructed, a new faith. Some people have completely deconverted out and are now, agnostic or atheist. And some people listening didn't have any church background at all.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I'm always trying to help people understand is, regardless of whether we're religious or not, and I would really love your perspective on this, because you've got a unique perspective, because you are in the church world, you're in the media world, you're doing these things, talking about, the Naming Project. Why is it important that the United States has a healthy church, right? Like, regardless of what you think about God or, the divinity of Jesus or not, I argue certain things, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Why it's important for everybody that the Church of the United States is healthy.
Yeah, well, this is good. I read an article this morning that has me thinking exactly about this too. And the article is ultimately about AI, and that AI responses are deprioritizing faith or religion responses when people are even coming to them with like morality, faith, existential life questions, which is kind of and realizing there is so much that we can get from a machine. There is something incredibly powerful to being in relationship with other people, that people who, are safe, know you, affirm you, challenge you, don't leave you completely safe and help you to stretch and learn and grow, which means they're not going to always agree with every single thing that you are going to say or do. And you're going to have to like struggle through that together. Church has been one of those places that has been a point where people can process the trauma and the joys and the milestones of life that help give significance to our meaning. And I think I read this book in seminary, but a book that really focuses on both like storytelling and ritual and how those pieces really shape who we are as people and how we move. And I want a strong and healthy church because I want strong and healthy people. And I think the way that I can read my Bible by myself in a room with nobody else around me, but actually talking about it with people who are also reading it, who are also interpreting it, who are also bringing their own lens and their own hermeneutic to it is incredibly helpful. Hearing from someone who's studied more of this than I have. And I think, there's always, the church is an institution, and institutions by and large do not have trust these days. The church is one, media is one, government is one. Trust in all of those institutions are abysmally low right now. And those are largely self-inflicted scandals where the protection of the institution became more important than the mission of that institution. And again, whether that's media or government or the church. For a Christian church, our work is about the proclamation of the gospel. And I think people only will know and believe and live into that proclamation of the gospel when they can feel that it is being made real in their lives in some way. The early church in Acts really grew because they were meeting people's tangible needs. They weren't just screaming at them from a street corner. And when people saw that this was an institution that was helping me, my folks, my people, the ones that have been overlooked by others, that's what helps it to grow. And I want a healthy church in the United States that does that. But the hardest thing about institutions become idols very easily because the continuation of the institution often becomes, and I say this, we need institutions. We can't just be, if we're all willy-nilly doing it, then we get a lot of cult of personalities and a lot of dangerous stuff happens from that. So like, I want the institution to be healthy and to know its place. It's not the idol. It is a tool for us as people to understand, and I go back to how we did the naming project, who God made me to be and how I'm going to relate to the rest of this world that God made.
That's so interesting that you say it that way too, because one of the things that I said this the other day, the interview won't come out until early July, but I interviewed constitutional lawyer and author Andrew Seidel, and we were talking about some of this kind of stuff, and I told him that even as a Christian pastor, progressive, or whatever you want to label it, I'm so tired of hearing about Christianity in the news and in the public sphere. And I said, if I'm tired of hearing about it, I can't imagine somebody outside of it, what they feel about it. And I think why I asked that question is because I'm tired of a church that's just so reactive. That's so hell bent into going headfirst into these culture wars and we're at the time of this recording, it's going to come out in June. We're heading into the 250 and all the stuff that's, this stupid like county fair. I don't even know what they're calling it anymore. But just all the language and all the stuff around it. And I'm just like, I think you're right. I think if we had an institution that just served, that looked like the person of Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, you can do whatever you want to with the divinity questions and all that stuff, but just looked like the person of Jesus and like really took what he said seriously versus, well, I'm going to force you, we're going to legislate like here in the state of Florida. There have not been any, there's just no policies taking place that are actually helping people.
Yeah.
It's all war.
I think I say this a lot. So I'll speak at like ministry conferences and again, I'll say this to you. I'm a deacon in a Lutheran church. Pastors are word and sacrament. preaching and teaching and administering the sacraments, which for Lutherans is communion and baptism. Deacons are word and service. So I still do like preaching and teaching, and I'll do it at churches if I get invited, but I teach and train a lot in my job. So I was like, that's part of it. And then service. And so what are the things that we're doing? So a lot of deacons work in social service agencies, they're chaplains, they're, food distribution. My particular call is this LGBTQ work that I do at GLAD. But when I speak to clergy, pastors, ministers, one of the things I say is, for so much of Christian history, we were the dominant institution culturally and legally and religiously. And the empire and the church were kind of the same thing. And even, we come to the United States that ostensibly has a freedom of religion, but we still make a very culturally dominant Christianity, which also meant that people inherently either did or had to trust the church and the authority that came from it and the authority of the people that were representing it. I now tell ministers that we are now in a phase that people do not inherently trust the church as an institution and the people who lead it. And part of that is the stories that they see. It's the scandals that they hear about. It's the devolving into politics and being very partisan. And I said, here's the reality is that actually will make us do ministry better. Because if we are thinking we have to do ministry in a way that will earn the trust of the people that we are trying to reach, we will act in a very different way than if we assume that we already have their trust and the authority over them. And it will make us, this goes back to the early church, that will make us think about what are their needs. How do we as a church help to meet the needs of the people so that they can not just hear the gospel, but be able to experience it in their life in some way too. And so I think that's one thing that this moment that we're in right now, this crumbling or distrust of the institution actually can be a benefit because it helps us to, my goodness, I almost said refiner's fire, which is not Lutheran language that we use at all. But it will make us rethink how we do ministry because we should just assume people don't trust us. And it would actually be better if we did because it would give us some level of humility, which is what we end up being taught in our role as Christians, as Christ followers, to have that form of humility. And that ultimately is where I hope the church, and I'm using a very big C, church writ large, will be able to learn and figure that out. But it's going to be painful because it is hard to lose power and privilege and the assumption of trust. And people aren't going to like it because it means that we're going to have to share and listen to people that aren't like us or aren't from us or come from a different background or have a different perspective. And that's going to take a lot of growing pains.
It does. It is hard. I will just say personally, what we did, and then institutionally leading a church from pretty typical evangelical church to being open and affirming, it was a process. It was a daunting process that we went through and lost a lot. Not comparatively, right? It's not the same kind of loss, but loss nonetheless. But what I will say this for anybody that may be listening, that's maybe contemplating or whatever, but what's waiting on the other side is totally worth it. I would 100% do it all over again, a million times, just knowing on the other side, even with the struggle that we still have. I got accused so many times of people being like, well, you're just taking the easy way out. You're taking the easy way out. And I'm like,
it's so not easy.
It's awful. Like the easy way is to just keep doing what I was doing because I was getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'm working two and a half jobs now. So you can take that easy and shove it.
Yeah.
So
I think people do want to assume that, no, it is really hard work. And people need to know and understand that. When I work for Lutherans Concerned, I would help churches that were going through that same process. And we had developed a whole training on it too, which was very much around faith-based community organizing. And we made them do this little quiz. I loved it. I called it a Cosmo quiz, but it was a series of statements about your church. And it helped you to map out how long this process was going to be. And they would fall into three buckets: Saint Adventurous, Saint Moderatus, and Saint Cautious. And we'd be like, look, even if you are the most progressive church, it is still minimally 9 months of work that you should do to make sure that when you make this statement of welcome, the congregation will actually live into it. And if you are in that cautious side, that is 3 to 5 years of work. Do not think this is a thing that you can just push through, because it can get undermined very easily. And you want to make sure that it's super robust.
Hmm. That's interesting. That might have been helpful. That might have been helpful to have. Wait, hey, I want to pivot because I don't want to spend all of our time here and not talk about the work that you're doing now. But your work there at GLAD, I think a lot of people kind of maybe misunderstand organizations like GLAD because, well, I'm basing this off of some misconceptions that I had
Hmm.
before I, got connected or started following you guys. I don't remember when that was, but like learning more over time. But I think a lot of people probably see GLAD and other advocacy kind of work as like mostly reacting to something that's happening in the larger culture. But I know that that's not always the case. I mean, that's true. That's going to be
Hmm.
part of it, right? But that's not always the case. And your organization, like GLAD, is playing the long game with a lot of things. So I'm curious if there's something that you might be able to share of something that's actually you guys are actually building that they
Yep.
don't see.
Yeah, I mean that's so accurate because GLAD really did start reactionary. We call ourselves a watchdog. The GLAD, we don't use it anymore. It used to be the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. So that meant against defamation meant someone had to say something bad, defamatory, and then we would like come in and be against it, right? And one, media is powerful, and we learned how that can be powerful against the community, but it also can be powerful for the community. And so we've been really successful over the last 41 years with mediums like film and television and even journalism. And now a few of the things that we've been realizing for the past couple of years is the media platforms where people get information, where they learn about the world, where they learn about the LGBTQ community are digital platforms, right? It is social media. It is the content creators like you, Joe, that are reaching people. It is those, lifestyle influencers and fandoms. They love sports. They still love local news because those are like known personalities. Podcasts like this are reaching people. And so really building out a way to do that same work that we've done to understand where people are, reach them there, and then figure out what are the right messages and what are the right stories and who are the right people that are going to be able to reach them. So like sports fandom is really powerful. If you can combine sports and comedy, you're like set. There's a lot of generally conservative anti-LGBTQ people that are both in the sports and comedy world. And we can be proactive like that, right? We can build and tell our own stories. We now have the tools like this thing we're recording on now, or like a TikTok or like something else to be able to do that. Now they do have to like get through, right, the algorithms that feed people information. And that still is a challenge. So GLAD puts out a lot of resources for like social media safety, which is one of the big ones that we just released last month. And making sure that people feel like they know where and how to tell stories, not just to like yell them out into the ether, but actually do it strategically and to think about who the movable middle people are in their lives, who probably are getting fed a lot of misinformation and disinformation. And then, what's going to move them? I have an Onion headline that I've saved in the back of my head forever, and I need to print it out. And it says, "Man supports gay rights after reading 300 pages of queer theory." Like that is what people need to be moved emotionally. They need to hear people that are talking about their interests, that are intersecting their lives, that are talking about how they share, values, how they share interests, how they share our civic life together. And so we do some proactive training for anyone who wants it, really, LGBTQ organizations, allies, friends, briefings on that, and then rolling out some of this data about shifting that, which we had been doing from like journalism and interviewing into social media content, and who are the right kind of guests and how to make and who are the right kind of collaborations and who are the right kind of people to reach a certain type of movable middle person. Can I reach the fandoms? Can I reach the soccer moms? Can I reach the parents of young kids that, parents of kids get scared by a lot of things. And so we've got a way in which we can share their concern and actually provide, this is the way we protect our kids. These laws and bills that are coming up are not doing it. It's actually putting your kids in more risk. The way we're going to keep them safe is by knowing and protecting and opposing bullying and those things too. And I think that's one of those really helpful things that we've been building out.
It's interesting. When you were talking about that, something popped up into my brain. Like this was not something I was thinking ahead of time, but you're talking about that, that the power of media and how you guys, GLAD as an organization, are learning to wield, pivot because
Mhm.
media is changing so rapidly all the time. I can remember the first time that I consciously was aware of somebody being queer in front of me was the TV show Friends.
Mm. Interesting. Okay.
Was the TV show Friends, where, Ross Geller's ex-wife left him and she was in
Right.
a lesbian relationship and they had shared custody and all this stuff. And I would not have called myself homophobic at the time, but I was, a typical straight white, teenager in the Midwest, very
Hmm.
conservative. So there was definitely a lot of internalized homophobia.
And it
And
was and in Friends, that was a joke and a punchline too.
yes, and they just kind of like dropped it in, like it wasn't. And it was just looking back, it's almost like this little seed was kind of just planted. There it is. And then, of course, other things, well, Will and Grace,
Yep.
that was
That's a
one of
big
the,
one for people.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Will and Grace. But the power of story, the power of showing people, it's the same thing when like, obviously Bill Cosby and all of his stuff, but when the Cosby Show, but you have like this Black American family just doing things that families do and how those stories break down barriers. People are people. I don't think that that's changed. Maybe the way we tell
Hmm.
the story has changed, but man, how
Yep.
powerful.
Yep. And I think that becomes the same kind. I think you're right. I'd forgotten about Friends, but yeah, a lot of people credit Will and Grace with one of the, it's a lead character. They're complex. They lean into some of the stereotypes, but also like break down some of them at the same time too. And that same kind of complexity ends up being like really important. One of the things, so GLAAD still does a film report and a television report on LGBTQ characters every year. And, one of the things that's important to us is that not every LGBTQ character has to make their entire storyline about them being LGBTQ. Can they be a person who has relationship issues and legal troubles and drama, the drama that we need to make TV interesting that isn't always related to coming out or transitioning? Those things do happen. But, a more recent example that did that was Schitt's Creek, where Dan Levy said, I want to create a universe in which homophobia is not even an option, right? That family is kooky and weird and unique, and David is one of them too. And he falls in love and gets into a relationship, and he has lots of drama, but it's not inherently part of just like him being pansexual. It just pops up time from time while he's still navigating being a rich guy in a small town, formerly rich guy in a small town. I really love that show.
That's insane. That show's insane. Yeah, it's true though. And now your work at GLAAD has a lot to do with that, And was that on purpose? If you look back on, your trajectory, was that strategic or was that something, so many of us like kind of fall into something and it's just like, oh,
Yeah.
this is perfect.
Well, yeah, no, it was, the vocational so one of my jobs at this college was a grant that was talking about vocation. What is God calling you to be in life? So I use the vocation a lot. And, before GLAAD, I was working for that Lutheran LGBTQ advocacy organization, which is now called Reconciling Works. I should stop dead naming this organization. Reconciling Works is what they're called now. And we had the policy of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. We were dealing with a lot of backlash to it and a lot of like hand-wringing and consternation and congregations leaving and joining alternate bodies and stuff like that. And one realization I had, no one gives a shit what Lutherans think. Like, what's a big deal in the ELCA is not influencing all of society.
No, it's not. Feel that.
And part of the opportunity that popped up at GLAAD, which originally was a director of religion, faith, and values job, was, okay, if I was able to do this inside the ELCA, my small 4.5 million people denomination, then what would that look like to do that same kind of work on a bigger scale that influences culture as a whole, right? And GLAAD thinks about who influences people. And some of the most progressive, welcoming denominations are also sometimes the ones, I hate to say this, get taken the least seriously, right? The ones that really influence society the most are evangelicals and Catholics. The rest of us all kind of like cluster around that in some way. And so how do we start to do some of that significant work that's building relationships? And one of the things I did was to start to work a lot with LGBTQ people or allies that were in those very stereotypically non-accepting church bodies. So like Catholics, evangelicals, Mormons, Muslims, like the ones people think like nobody would ever be queer in here. And there always are. There's always somebody and there's some organization. And so I'm going to find them and I'm going to use GLAAD's power of the press to help elevate and promote their story and present this counter narrative. And I think this is important, actually important to listeners too. Don't do it in an apologetic way. Don't do well, not all Christians are like that, but actually state my story or your story or the story of a Mormon or a Muslim or an evangelical as the norm, right? This is our own testimony. I don't have to apologize for it because it is the reality of where God called me to be in my life. And I spend a lot less time defending or apologizing for myself and my life and my vocation, and more just stating it matter of fact. But it's the same thing of saying, like, making a reference to my husband and making someone else think about it. I don't have the big coming out speech. I just have like, this is a detail of my life, but what I'm really here to talk to you about is blah, 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 something else. And so that's part of what I think ends up being really powerful from GLAAD. And my job has changed over time at GLAAD, but the religion piece has always like been a through line where when someone, we have this like celebrity and they want to come out, but they're super religious, can you talk to them? So I've done a lot of like coaching for people that are coming out or doing LGBTQ projects, or people that high profile allies. So Colton Underwood's someone who's deeply religious, and getting to work with him during his process of coming out, writing a letter to Pope Francis and talking about criminalization laws and how harmful they are and how much they violate Catholic Church doctrine about imprisonment or execution, and getting him to a place to be able to say these laws are unjust. Those are things, that my job stopped being director of religion, faith, and values, but I'm still a deacon and I still do this work through my paid job during the day.
That's so cool. I love that. That's so cool. Just sit here listening to you talk about that. I'm just like, wow, that is deep, meaningful work. I mean, just deep, meaningful work.
It is. It is. There's a vocation line. This is the calling, right? And it is not easy. Here's the other reputation that GLAAD can get. We have a media awards, which is our big fundraiser gala. We get a lot of celebrity folks there too. So I think some people think that like GLAAD is nonstop glamour and red carpets, right. And it is really hard work. But it's a calling. It's what we're called to do. And we're working every angle to think of what platform does this person have? What types of people listen to them and trust them? And what kind of stories and examples could they be telling that are going to reach them to help them to know and understand better the reality of our lives, or to understand how these laws or these bills are hurting people, or how there potentially could be some laws and bills that could actually help people. Thinking through that ends up being really important because it plays out in so much of our life, right? GLAAD is a C3, so I'm still doing civic engagement work because that is important, and political leaders have a big platform. And so working that angle as much as possible. By the time people listen to this, there'll be some polling data that's getting released today. We're doing this on June 1st. But so that talks about, voter attitudes on things like pride and on the midterms. And also, like, we hear so many anti-trans campaigns, ads, but the things voters care about most are going to be things like cost of living, the stability of their democracy, war happening in the Middle East, the stuff which also goes back to their pocketbooks, right? Trans issues are the very bottom of the list. This is not what's motivating voters, but we've got political leaders that want to make that the issue so that we don't talk about economic justice and taxes and affordability and housing and healthcare and things like that. The things that we know people need to make their lives more stable and better.
It's so funny you say that, because like you can literally see that playing out in Texas right now. I mean, literally, that's exactly what say what you want to about James Tallarico. I'm not speaking for or against him. However, like, can the Republican side there, they literally have nothing. They're just like trying to throw insults at him, seeing what sticks.
Yep. And I got to teach a class at the seminary that he attended. He was not in the class, but like that's as close as I've gotten to. I'm sort of like, oh, I do this thing with this one seminary and he's a student there. And it's been really cool to hear him, like, how he's incorporated that faith language and that Texas language too. This is part of it. Is all this has to connect back to the people that you're trying to lead and the people that you're trying to reach. And, I'm in Minnesota, very different than Texas. The culture, the climate, and there's a way you tap into that culture that I think ends up being really important.
I'm wondering what keeps you human. What's keeping you human in the work that you're doing right now?
That's a good question, because it's different than hope, I think. I know I've said this like 3 or 4 times during this interview, but I think this is a primary motivator for me, is keeping a human connection with other people, other real people, makes such a huge difference. It stops all this from becoming issues that are kind of cognitive and I can like rationalize in my head, to thinking about what that means for my neighbors, the people that, and neighbor in that biblical sense, the people that live close to me, and also that humanity that I'm connected to, that when they're suffering, what do I do to help? And the human piece is, there is a lot of suffering and both suffering and angst. And some people are feeling this very directly. Some people are feeling this secondhand, even if they're not directly affected by it. And the way that I'm seeing people come together and worship and pray together and organize and then take like really good tangible steps toward this is how we're going to solve this problem, that both gives me hope, but also gives the human side of it. I mentioned before we got in here, I was at a convention this weekend. I won't talk too much about it too, but this group that I was a part of that was sort of doing a lot of influencing with it. There's a group chat, and it was chaotic and wild, and the announcements from the leaders would get buried underneath like 1,000 other hot takes or reactions. And as we met, I find this funny. So this group chat, again, chaotic. When we kind of gathered this weekend, someone said, the group chat is chaos right now. Are there any norms that we should start to establish, kind of rules? And my husband raised his hand. He's like, if someone says we're doing this thing at this time and you can't be there, you don't need to go into the group chat to say you can't be there. And it was like, yeah, even if you can be there, you don't need to respond saying you will be there. You could just show up or not show up like that. We can keep this clear. And that's very human, right? Like people are reacting and having thoughts and debating and loving each other. And the last part of this chat, now that we're gone, was, oh my goodness, we left that room in a mess. And one of the things we need to make sure we do next time is like clean up after ourselves. And that was like very human, right? Like, oh my goodness, I thought somebody else was going to take care of this and nobody did. So that gives me hope and understands like the very human connection of this whole thing.
I love that. That's so true, right? And I love the fact that the examples that you used were just everyday, mundane things that we all like experience. And like, yeah.
And they're people, they are trying their best. So this is vocation. And this is, if you know anything about Lutherans, one of our biggest theological contributions is the whole concept of grace. Like, we are not getting this right. We are messy and chaotic and trying to figure out how to do the best thing under whatever circumstances and with whatever information we have. And we are going to trust that the grace of God is going to cover up whatever ways we fall short of that, because we will. And it also keeps us still trying to do, we don't give up. We keep trying to do the right thing. And we're going to trust that grace of God to both lead us in the right direction and to fill the places that we fall short. And I think that's a motivator for me. It's also why I stayed with this church, with this denomination. I really do believe in it and its theology. And I think it's one of the best, most accessible theologies. And I try to live that out in a secular organization like GLAD, or in a religious setting like the Naming Project, or in, really structured church settings. That makes me feel much more real and not just stuck in my head all the time.
No, listen, that you're preaching to the choir now. I love it. Ross, thank you so much for your time. We're gonna have the links in the show notes, not only to GLAD and the work that you're doing, but your website, and then also some of the other stuff that you're doing, so that people can see, get plugged in, maybe start supporting some of the stuff that you're doing, because some of that work, like, super, super important. Man, thank you so much, not only for this, but just for all the work that you guys do behind the scenes. Just such,
thank you.
Especially right now, right? It's just so crucial, vital. So thank you for all of it.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. And also, again, the work that you do, the content, the podcasting, you're moving into this area and being one of those pioneers and figuring it out. And so getting this does not have to be the end of our working relationship. And I hope it's not.
Bingo. Same, man. We'll be in touch. Hey, friends, make sure that you hit those show notes. Go check out the stuff. I was reading about the Naming Project. I mean, I knew about it, but I was reading about the Naming Project again this morning, just kind of brushing up. And man, I know kids. Like, we have a group, not to make this longer, but we have a group here that I work with through our local Pride Center. And I love them, number one. And number two, I think it's just some of the most important work. Go to the website, go see all the stuff. Thanks for following along. I hope that wherever you find yourself today, you're having the exact day that you need. And don't forget, you might be the only voice of reason that somebody hears today, so don't be afraid to use it. All right, friends, until next time.